What if you invited something into your life that you couldn't control? In this chilling episode, we dive deep into the dark corners of the internet, where real people, ordinary people, share the terrifying encounters they've had with the paranormal. These aren't just stories. They're first-hand accounts of chilling, unexplainable events that began with one innocent game, the Ouija board. But what happens when the spirits you try to communicate with refuse to stay in the game? Get ready to hear bone-chilling experiences straight from Reddit users who played with forces beyond their understanding. Spirits that cross the line. Entities that wouldn't leave. Do you dare to listen? Or will you be too afraid to even say their names? Stay tuned, if you can handle the truth. Two good friends of mine who live a state over decided to come visit me on a whim. We bought some good time supplies, and one night, really late, we had all sobered up and found ourselves with nothing to do. One of my friends, we'll call her Alex, and I had already messed with a Ouija board before on a few occasions. We both know a lot about them and managed to rally up the hopes of our respective boyfriends. Neither of the men were true believers, so we figured, why not? Something to do. So we made a Ouija board. Nobody ever tells you that playing with a Ouija board is a good, safe, or fun thing to do. Ever. Prior to this night, I did actually think they were fun. But quickly, I understood why so many people had warned me of the board. For the first 10 or 15 minutes, it was mostly us just asking questions to empty air. Then Alex suggested that we turn out the lights. We lit candles, turned the radio on to white noise, and let the room get dark. That's when things started to get weird. The planchette, before we could even ask if there was anything there, moved very quickly to hello. To which I asked, "Who are you?" The static noise from the radio stopped. It was dead silent. The planchette spelled out very quickly, Zozo. I can't remember specifically all of the questions we asked, but I remember some of the answers. It told us to get help, and when we asked for whom, it spelled out white cat. That's my big kitty, and the next day he was limping with a hurt rear leg. He was fine the day before. I don't know what happened. When we asked Zozo to give us a sign of his presence, he spelled out stop. Around that time we started to hear weird screeching noises coming from the radio, but I figured it was just interference and turned it off. Then half of the things on top of my fridge fell to the floor. A bag of bananas, a container of garlic cloves, a glass dish, and a bag of onions crashed onto the floor in a big heap, and before I could even react, half of the candles blew out too. We acknowledged Zozo out loud and thanked him. I have lived in this apartment for 10 months, and I've never seen anything like that happen. I was freaked out. It was getting real. We decided to ask Zozo to leave. He told us no. We decided to tell it to leave. The planchette kept going back from hello to no. It did this 7 or 8 times. My two friends took their fingers off the planchette. They were scared. My boyfriend and I were the only ones with fingers on it. I was the designated medium, but out of nowhere my boyfriend demanded Zozo to leave because he was not welcome in our home. My brain was like, what a bad idea. We began to try and move the planchette in circles like you do when you're expecting an answer, and all of a sudden, it stopped the hello spot of the board and would not move. We actually slid the whole board off the table trying to get it to move. It was being pushed down hard. My boyfriend and I only had a finger each on it. I guess anything is possible, but I can't see how it could have been him, and I know it wasn't me. The next morning, I folded the board into 3 and buried it off of a nature trail at the edge of my town. There were really weird things happening in our house until recently. While I was in the bathroom late at night, what looked like 2 feet was obstructing the light shining under the door. The door to our office locks from the outside, and while my boyfriend and I were in there, it locked. His 2-year-old was in bed sleeping. I just don't think she's agile or tall enough to lock that door without anyone hearing her. Plus, that thing with my cat's hurt back leg. We would hear things in our bedroom being thrown around, and what sounded like people walking around in our living room at night. it all sort of gradually stopped. Nothing really obtrusive has been happening lately. My friend and I didn't take the Ouija board seriously, and our boyfriends didn't believe it at all. We had one session that went all rogue and freaky, and actually made my house haunted for a week or so. I won't tell you not to mess with it because that's dumb. Just be ready for things to get real fast. My best friend's family used to play with one all of the time, but because of some of the things that happened, she's never touched one. Her sister first started to use one when my friend was an infant. Strange things happened at that house. Her sister looked outside of the window one day, and this was in the middle of the day, and saw a family dressed in clothes from maybe the end of the 19th century or beginning of the 20th century, staring back at her. Another time, my friend's family heard my friend crying. Her mom went to investigate and said the reason that my friend was crying was because something was pulling on her limbs and wouldn't let her move. Other weird things happened, like paint popping off of the kitchen walls and things moving around in front of them. Her mom said that when she was pushing my friend around the house in a stroller while talking on the phone, she saw a red door pop up in front of her. No idea what that means. Then they moved to a new house and continued to use the Ouija board. Other weird things happened in that house too, and I've always gotten an uncomfortable feeling from being in it. And this was when I was 9, way before I knew about any of the stuff that actually happened. My friend saw and heard things move around in her room, and her brother used to hear someone walk up the stairs, open my friend's bedroom door, and close it. He assumed it was her, but he freaked out when he actually heard her voice the second time, meaning that the first instance wasn't her. This was a regular occurrence. I'm not sure of the authenticity of this next story, because it does sound fishy, and I don't blame you if you don't believe it. But her sister is not very intelligent. She spent 2 years in high school before she dropped out, and had only earned a gym credit, so I don't know how or why she would lie about this. Anyway, her sister said that she was playing with the board one day, and when she asked who she was speaking to, she got a weird name. It struck her as odd, but she didn't really worry about it. Weeks later, she watched a special on the History Channel or something. They were discussing demonology. She recognized one of the names as being the strange one she had encountered through the Ouija board. This was a long time ago, so my friend and I can't remember the exact name. All we can remember is that it supposedly resembles a ram, and that we were able to find information on it on the interwebs. Oh, and her sister is sensitive. For several years now, every time she has a dream about a dying bird, that means something bad is going to happen to her family within the next few days. Every time she told them about it, someone died, got really injured, got really sick, etc. I'm sure that her sensitivity makes her using a Ouija board a different experience. Edit. I just remembered that her sister used to perform seances with her friends, which I doubt helped the state of that household. Sorry, I don't have any specific details as to what went down during these seances, but because of how sensitive she is, I doubt that anything good came out of them. Also, since my friend's brother moved in with their grandmother, she's mentioned to my friend that she keeps seeing a little boy outside on her porch. She did not see him before her brother moved in, and we know that he still plays with that damn board. Here's a Ouija story that still freaks me out to this day, so I'll try to keep it as short as possible. While stationed in Germany in the early 2000s, me and a group of friends decided to play the Ouija board in our military dorm rooms. Only 4 of us actually played, while a couple more people drank and watched us. After a couple minutes of us joking around, we started asking more serious questions. We eventually got in contact with a teen girl who told us she was looking for her boyfriend. She said that they were driving back from a Grateful Dead concert when they crashed their car and died, and she hasn't seen him since. The road they crashed on was one we knew well. It connected 2 Air Force bases and was pretty curvy and dangerous, and a lot of people had crashed and died driving it. After a couple minutes of small talk, she told us she had to leave, but asked us if we could please find her boyfriend for her, and gave us his name. I forgot it over the years. We eventually were able to make contact with him, and when we asked him if he knew Cheryl, the girl's name, he said yes. She was his true love, and he regretted not being able to be with her, and missed her very much. He told us to tell her that he'd always love her, and that he was sorry. When we asked him what he was sorry about, he just spelled out random letters until he eventually stopped communicating with us. After around 10 minutes of unsuccessfully trying to get in touch with Cheryl and her boyfriend again, we finally got in contact with an older woman. She seemed really sweet and nice, and she said she knew Cheryl. When we asked her why she was unable to find her boyfriend, she said it was because Cheryl was in heaven and her boyfriend was in hell. It was at that moment where the candles in the room flickered out, and we all jumped up and turned the lights on. Needless to say, everyone got pretty freaked out and decided to stop playing, and we never really talked about it after that. It's been over 10 years, and it still freaks me out thinking about that night. I've shared before, but I will share again. My stepdad is the kind of man that doesn't lie ever, which is why I believe his story about a Ouija board experience he had when he was younger. He said he had friends over and had a Ouija board, and they wanted to play. After a bit of playing around, they made contact with a being that said it was a demon. His friends were asking it questions, but he said the thing pinpointed him. It told my stepdad it would visit him again later after midnight. Thoroughly freaked, they put the board away. My stepdad fell asleep and with dead seriousness said he was woken right after 12 by it. Now the demon had told them its name, but my stepdad refused to tell me. He was genuinely afraid. Anyway, he said this thing woke him. It was sitting at the end of his bed, grinning. He said it was small and evil looking, just grinning at him. The thing told him his first child would die, and it left. My stepdad said afterwards that he tried to get rid of the board. He first threw it out with the trash, but it didn't work. He said a few days later, a little boy that he had never seen in the neighborhood showed up at his door with a board. He handed it to my stepdad and said, "This is yours," and left. So now, super freaked out, my stepdad tried to burn it, but it wouldn't catch fire. The fire kept dying no matter what he did. So then he dug a very deep hole, put the board in it, placed a Bible on top, and buried it. He's not seen the board since. As far as what the demon predicted, it came true. His first wife miscarried at 3 months. I wholeheartedly believe my stepdad's story, and it's why I never got a board or messed with one. Plus, they are very banned in my parents' home. A few friends and I mucked around with Ouija boards a lot as teenagers. It had always been harmless fun. One night, we were speaking with a young boy called Niall who had told us he had been murdered by his father. We spoke with him for a while, and then got bored of the conversation, left, and eventually tried again. We started to speak with someone we assumed was an elderly lady, when actually it turned out it was Niall again. Someone must have asked, "What do you want?" because the Ouija pointer spelt out, "Satisfy my requests," and then continuously spelled answers over and over again until we freaked out and just abandoned everything. The board, the house, the street. I have never touched a Ouija board since. Early last year, a few of us got together again, having all gone our separate ways since high school, and we brought that night up and everyone swore again that they hadn't moved anything on purpose that night. Of course, someone could still be lying, or we could have inadvertently been moving the pointer without realizing, but just remembering the force of the pointer moving so rapidly, and what it spelt out freaked me out enough not to want to mess with it again, just in case. When I was 13 and my now deceased sister was 14, we decided, after watching an old movie about Ouija boards, to make our own. Since our house was being renovated at the time, there were tons of materials in the backyard that we thought we could use, such as wood planks and whatnot, so we went scavenging. We found one of these and taped a piece of paper over it and drew our board with all the elements. I was an easily scared child, and she was fearless, so I told her to maneuver the board, and that I wouldn't touch it. She laughed at me, and we proceeded to ask questions. A spirit came through, told us his name was Roger, and that he had died of food poisoning. During that time, our oldest sister, who was pregnant and visiting us, was upstairs vacuuming and doing some cleaning. We had a central vacuum, and the box was in a closet just beside my bedroom downstairs, in which we were playing with a board, so it was pretty noisy in the room because of the vacuum cleaner. If our sister had spoken to us, we would not have heard her. So fast forward to a few minutes of silence from the board, when suddenly the planchette starts spinning really fast, and spells, "Our sister's name wants to talk to you asterisk." We were puzzled as we didn't hear her talk to us. At that moment, the vacuum stopped, and she yelled at us to come help her with chores. We were pretty freaked out about that coincidence and decided to throw the board away in the backyard. It was similar to this. We weren't allowed to wander off in the semi-ravine that had formed, and it wasn't fenced, so we knew not to get too close. We threw the board in the ravine and forgot about it. The next day, it was very warm outside, and my sister came to me to ask me if I wanted to go for a swim in our pool. I said yes, and we each went to our bedrooms to put on our swimsuits. We go outside by the back door, and right there, laying by the pool, is the board. We exchanged a deeply horrified look, threw it a second time very far down in the ravine, and never spoke of that story again to anyone. I wish she was here to tell you about it. It was pretty freaky. A friend of mine was really eager to get rid of her board. She said that no matter where she used it, or with whom, the same spirit or entity would always try to contact her. She'd been keeping it in the bed of her truck for months because she didn't want it in her house. I didn't believe her and had always wanted one, so I took it and left it in the trunk of my car. Fast forward 6 months to my boyfriend and I being bored in our apartment one night. I decided to pull out the board and see what would happen. Nothing did. Not surprised, I left the board boxed on our table and forgot about it. Not long after, weird stuff started happening. At first it was odd, but pretty innocuous. I was reading on the toilet one day when the shower curtain next to me was ripped open. I thought it was the cats, but the bathroom door was closed, and when I stepped out, all 3 were fast asleep on the bed. A few days later, I was walking through the living room when the vacuum cleaner turned on by itself. Not too odd, I figured. Again, I thought the cats must have bumped into it, but when I looked, I saw the vacuum wasn't plugged in. As soon as I realized this, it stopped. I told my boyfriend about it, but he didn't believe me until things started happening to him. I worked the night shift, so he spent a few nights a week alone in the apartment. One morning, I came in to find him sitting up in bed looking shaken. The fact that he was awake alone was strange. He usually slept like a rock until I came home from work to wake him up. Even more unsettling was the fact that he looked so freaked out. This guy has always been the fearless daredevil type and has had his own experiences with the supernatural. He said nothing had freaked him out this badly before. He woke up in the middle of the night, and while he sat in bed, he heard an extremely loud crash in the living room, so loud it shook the apartment. He insisted that it was definitely in the apartment and not one of the neighbors. He likened it to the sound of a table being hurled across the room and into the wall. When he got up to check, nothing was amiss. The cats couldn't have knocked anything over because we were getting ready to move and most of our things were packed and furniture moved. He got back in bed a bit shaken, and then something was thrown at him. He didn't want to investigate and couldn't sleep, so he sat in bed waiting for me to get home. When I looked, I found my hair straightener in the bed. The straightener always stayed plugged in on the bathroom counter. Whatever had thrown it would have had to unplug it and bring it around the corner into the bedroom and throw it at the bed. A few nights later, we came home and our cats were very agitated. Our cat Sabrina was especially distraught. She kept running up to us, meowing and running back into our office, then back out again like she was trying to get our attention. We went back to investigate and found our heavy computer speaker had been lifted off the desk and wedged perfectly into the corner of the room about 6 feet away with all the connections intact. She kept pacing by the speaker, meowing and hissing. Creepy. We moved into our new house not long after, but by this point we'd started to suspect the Ouija board. I didn't bring it into the house. I left it in the downstairs storage area. For reference, you can only enter the house through the garage. There's a door leading into a storage area and laundry room, and our door is off the storage room. The storage room often felt ominous, and a few times while I was down there, the door into the garage would open of its own accord and then slam shut. The door is tricky and likes to stick in the frame, so it's rather difficult to open. One night I got a feeling of intense foreboding and went downstairs. Sabrina was sitting at the door that leads to the storage room with her fur on end and growling. That was enough. I have theories on apartment poltergeists mingling with human energy and the like, but I was not going to stand for anything in our new house. I took it to Goodwill the next day. Since then, there has been no inexplicable weirdness in the house. Spent a couple of summers at an old rectory that was rumored to be haunted by a chaplain that lived there long ago. In addition to a child that drowned nearby, the rectory consisted of a main building, in addition to small houses nearby that either was used by servants, nuns, monks, or farmers before. So these days, there are a lot of families renting these houses or rooms in the main building during the summer holiday. We met about 6 other teenagers around me and my brother's age, from 14 to 18 years old. Due to this rumor about the haunting, we decided to try to communicate through a homemade Ouija board. First session was pretty boring. We asked mostly about who they were, when they were born and such. The interesting part was that most of the information we got lined up pretty well with what was written down in the records of people who lived in that area, which was a small place far out in the country. One of the kids that we did had these sessions with had a grandmother that was newly deceased who used to spend a lot of time on this place during the summers and the rest of the year when it wasn't that cold outside. She convinced us to try to make contact with her grandmother. So at the next session, after the initial asking who we had contact and so forth, we asked if her grandma was present and got the yes. We then asked if she was nearby and also got the yes, so we asked for a sign. At this point, we were sitting on the upper floor in the main building inside one of the rooms that was for rent. A small room with a single window, which was closed, and 2 bunk beds. Everyone was looking around somewhat scared, waiting for something to happen. After a short while, we heard the sound of someone in wooden clogs coming up the stairs, and about halfway up the stairs, a hoarse voice calling out this girl's name, and at the end, the steps stopped right outside the door. We're now sitting in a circle on the floor, 6 people. One girl is sitting with the back to the door, on her right side, the granddaughter, waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, the girl sitting closest to the door starts hyperventilating and tears fill her eyes. We're all basically frozen in fear at this point. It's really hard to get a feeling for how fast time went. But not long after it started, it stopped and started with the person on her left side doing the same. I don't think I really understood at that time that I was next in line. It ended with the person next to me, and I suddenly felt something touch my shoulders. It wasn't completely like the physical touch of a human, but it definitely was something that put weight on my shoulders. I of course freeze and start hyperventilating at the shock of something unknown touching me. When this has gone halfway through the circle, it jumps straight at the granddaughter, who starts with the same hyperventilating and breaks down crying. Then the door suddenly opens. We all jump into all corners of the room trying to hide. This is the most scared I can recall having been so far. Luckily, this is one of the parents, who at an earlier point claimed to be a medium of some sort. She claimed to have felt something was wrong, which is why she went upstairs despite renting at another of the small houses nearby. She helped us end the session, and nothing more happened, except that we were all scared as hell that night. Way back when my mother was only a baby and my uncle was 4 years old, my grandmother invited some friends round, while their husbands went to drink at the pub. They had a nice house in the mountains, and so it wasn't often that people ventured up there unless their intention was to visit. After the men had left, the women decided to do a Ouija board. My grandmother had already put my mother to sleep, and so the only other person in the house was my uncle, who was playing in the kitchen with them. They all put a finger on a planchette and asked the generic questions. After a few minutes of trying, the planchette moves. My grandmother was a little uncomfortable with this, but they carried on anyway. They decide to ask how the person died. The Ouija board spells out the sentence "cannot tell you." This confused them. My grandmother asks why not, and it tells them there are too many ears. My grandmother tells me that this surprised them, and they weren't sure how to carry on. That's when the planchette began to move again, and it told them to send the boy out of the room. The boy being my uncle. My grandmother is ashamed that she actually sent him into a different room. The planchette then starts to spell something else, but stops suddenly, and instead spells out "someone is coming," and then hurriedly says goodbye. It turns out that my granddad had forgotten his wallet and driven back to the house. My grandmother looks back on this and tells me she's glad they were interrupted. She's never messed with a Ouija board since. When I was younger, I was really close with my cousin Donnie. We would spend a lot of time playing in the early 90s. My experience was very simple, but still memorable. Donnie is 2 years older than me, so I was 11 at the time, and he was 13. We used to love playing with the Ouija board, and it would freak out our grandmother, who would often watch us. She didn't want us to use it and expressed her disapproval by saying, "I don't want you boys to use that thing in this house." We took this literal and brought it inside this old camper that my father recently purchased from a newspaper ad. We loved playing in the camper since it was like having our own little house to play in. We went straight to the camper with our Ouija board after being told not to use it in the house. We put the Ouija board on the top bed of a small bunk bed inside the camper and started asking questions. The pointer was very quick to respond and would rapidly go to H and to A over and over again, ignoring all our questions. We finally saw that it was laughing, and we asked what was so funny. At this time it slowed down and spelt out, "You are trapped." We stopped using the Ouija board and goofed off in the camper for a few minutes until we wanted to leave. I went to the door to exit the camper, and as I grabbed the handle, it pulled right out of the door into my hand. We both started to feel very uneasy and frantically tried to push the door open. After 1 minute of this, we calmed down and pushed the handle back into the hole in the door and kept pushing and wiggling it until the door eventually opened. This was one of the first paranormal experiences I've had, and also the lowest level of activity, but one that I won't forget. Recently, I've seen a lot of talk about Ouija boards being bullcrap and bunk, so I thought that I would share a story that, to me at least, refutes this. Honestly, I suppose if I hadn't had the experience that I had, that I would think they were just toys as well. Certainly in the time since this story happened, nothing even close to it has ever happened again, and I've tried multiple times with multiple people. Also, I live with a serious skeptic, my husband. He has told me that he would never believe this story if he didn't know me so intimately, and knows I wouldn't make it up. And if the story hadn't been corroborated by other members of my family who are well beyond trustworthy. So I do understand that some disbelief is going to come into play here. All I can say is that all of the following is entirely true, and you can either take my word or not. So, this happened when I was about 16 years old. I'm 38 now, so that puts it about 1991 or so. It was New Year's Eve. My parents had a party to go to, and for some reason I can't remember right now, I wasn't going out. My older brother and his partner, along with my oldest sister, all decided to come over and stay in with me. Even at 16, my parents didn't care if I stayed home and got drunk with my much older brother and sister, 8 years and 13 years older than I, respectively, so the four of us proceeded to get entirely wasted, accompanied by a procession of mixed drinks and champagne. We watched the ball drop on TV, and did the usual stuff. But after a while we started to get bored and look for things to do. We played some cards, but after a while that got boring as well. I suggested playing with the Ouija board. My friends and I had bought a Ouija board to play with a few weeks earlier, and since my parents were the most liberal, I was the one hanging on to it at my house. We'd done a little messing around with it, but the usual teenage bullcrap and accusations of pushing the planchette, nothing had happened up until now. Being drunk and open-minded, the other three agreed, and we got out the board. At first, we contacted a spirit that claimed to be named Naomi, and my sister remembered my great-grandmother's middle name had been Naomi. She'd hated her first name, and we chatted with the spirit for a while. Nothing momentous was said, and certainly not anything that would make your hair stand on end. My parents came in, and we stopped playing while my brother had to help haul my drunk mother to bed. After that, my sister and my brother's partner were getting drowsy, and both of them decided to crash for the night. My brother and I, however, decided to stay up and keep playing around with the board for a while. It was nearly 3 a.m. at this point. At first, we didn't get anything at all, and we sort of stopped asking questions, just talking with our hands resting on the planchette. Then, it began to move. We asked, "Who are you?" It answered, "Eugene." An unlikely name, and we were still fairly drunk, so we laughed at this quite a lot. Eugene seemed like a very nerdy and silly name for a ghost. We asked, "Why are you contacting us, Eugene?" We received the answer, "Afraid." That seemed a bit more serious. We asked, "Why are you afraid, Eugene?" It replied, "Music." Over and over. Nonsense. Then we got a series of numbers. Puzzling. My brother had the bright idea to turn on the radio to the station indicated by the numbers. To our surprise, there really was a station there. The song, "Don't Leave Me Stranded" by Heart was playing. The board immediately started saying, "Heart." I thought my brother was just playing off of what he was hearing and was screwing with me. Then it started saying, "Don't go, don't leave me, don't go, church, church, afraid, don't go," over and over and over. We assured it we weren't going to go, but it dwindled into nonsense after a while. It was getting really late, and we decided to go to bed. The next morning, which was nearer to afternoon, we were having New Year's Day breakfast when the phone rang. My dad answered it and went off into the bedroom to talk. We were still eating when he came back out and said it was my grandmother on the phone. Apparently her brother Eugene in Arizona, whom we weren't even aware of the existence of, had had a heart attack the night before. He had died multiple times on the table during the night and had to be revived. We were stunned. We told my dad the entire story, and he was flabbergasted. A day or two later, my grandmother called again to update my dad, and he told her the story. She was stunned into silence. She said that, when Eugene had regained consciousness, the first thing he had said was that he was so afraid for his soul because he hadn't been to church in 20 years, and he wanted to go to church immediately and have a preacher come in. It was almost as if we had been some sort of lifeline for him that night. I am firmly agnostic. I don't know what's out there, but I do know, because of this experience, that there's something. I've been fascinated by the paranormal ever since. This happened on October 3rd, 2014. My friends and I decided to spend the night aboard the Queen Mary, an old cruise liner ship that looks just like Titanic and now has a permanent residence as a floating hotel in Long Beach, California. I've only used a Ouija board one other time in my life, the year anniversary of my grandma's death in 2007. It worked ridiculously well and freaked me out so much that I vowed to never use one again. But my curiosity got the best of me. The scarier part of all this is that we didn't even have a Ouija board on us. We made one in the most ghetto way possible out of 2 small pieces of paper, taped together with band-aids, and used the plastic band-aid box as the pointer. We wrote the letters and words in pen. It worked just as well as the real Ouija board I used before. Our friend's brother recently lost his life a few months prior, with zero explanation, no history of depression, no problems at home, no note. Needless to say, my friend is still very upset and confused about the whole ordeal and wants answers. He's been to psychics and stuff, and the only reason I agreed to do this was because he insisted, and I just want to help him relieve some of the pain. Plus, I figured it wouldn't work anyway because it was made out of paper. We asked the board if anyone wanted to talk to us. Immediately, it moved to yes. I would have thought someone was messing with us, but I felt the same exact, eerie pull I did with a real Ouija board, and given my friend's vulnerable state, I doubt my friends would be so cruel. Okay, so the board is moving. Cool. I think we asked it for a name, and it clearly spelled out Zach. My friend's brother's name is Michael, so we're asking it questions, and this is a truncated version because I don't remember everything, and I just remember it continuing to answer questions saying Zach. We asked how old it was, and it said 27 or some number in the late 20s. My friend Danielle was worried because she has a cousin named Zach with cerebral palsy, and she was scared that he just died or something, but he's much younger. What happened later still sends shivers down my spine. We were all sitting on the ground next to the bed. The door to our room was about 5 feet away. This was around 2 or 3 in the morning. I forget what we asked it, but all 4 of us clearly heard someone, as if they were standing right outside the door, say, "It's Zach." It was so clear that I thought someone had been listening to our conversation and wanted to mess with us. I swear we didn't imagine it. Danielle went to bed because she was too freaked out to continue, but me and my 2 guy friends decided to keep going. We did at some point get in touch with Michael, but he didn't seem to want to say much. I started talking to my grandparents, and just to prove how real it was, I took my hands off the board, wrote answers to the questions in a journal, and had the 2 guys use it. It got them right every time. It spelled out addresses, street names, my dad's middle name. I was amazed but also creeped out. What if it was just something pretending to be my loved ones? But it wasn't until morning that we learned of something even scarier. When we all woke up, Danielle started laughing and kind of joking about how Scotty woke up in the middle of the night screaming bloody murder with a night terror. The other guy, Daniel, who was sleeping in my bed, said he heard the whole thing. I was unconscious this whole time, so I thought. When I told Danielle I don't remember that, her face turned white. She said she heard me sounding scared, saying parts of the Our Father over and over again repeatedly. She thought I was freaked out by Scotty and was praying to comfort myself. Then she asked me, "Did you hear that?" referring to Scotty, and I just said, "Yes, SHH. Both me and Scotty don't remember any of that at all. It's like we were possessed." Both Daniel and Danielle heard it. Danielle also said she felt like someone was grabbing and pulling on her all night too. Another coincidence was that the day after our night on the Queen Mary, the new season of Ghost Hunters premiered, and it took place on the Queen Mary. I watched it, but no mention of a ghost named Zach. I got my first Ouija board at 16. At 17, it accurately predicted some heavy stuff that was going to happen to 2 skeptical sisters who were hanging around my friend group. We all chalked it up to coincidence. At 18, the board repeatedly was found set up with 35 cents on it. No matter where we put it away, basement, closet, neighbor's garage, it came back to the same spot with the same amount of change. I convinced myself it was one of my brothers messing with my psyche. My best friend took the change one day and said she was going to hang on to it for luck. Mind, we were poor kids living on our own and would have usually thrown it into the pot for whatever was needed that day. She held onto it and the board quit setting up. When it was almost forgotten, she was saved by having the 35 cents in her pocket. It was the amount it took to make a payphone call at the time. She got out of a sticky situation that could have turned bad. Next day, the Ouija board was set up again with 2 coins. I have a ton of these stories. Little things. Then one major thing changed all of our perspectives forever. We set up to play just me and my best friend. We wanted advice about moving or not. My 2 younger brothers were lounging around making fun of us. My baby brother is a certified genius and pish-posh the non-provable. I'm average smart and my bestie was average dumb. We asked a question and the marker flew to no. We then asked something similar. It circled around 3 times. No, no, no. Still we persisted. The oracle flew around the board. It didn't make sense hitting random letters. My brother told us it's making sense to him. It's just spelling backward. My second brother started jotting down the letters. It predicted my friend's marriage, children, and death in that sitting. 6 years later, every single prediction true to the letter. My family is pagan, from the Druid line specifically. Forms of divination are practiced in many forms. When I got my board, it was properly blessed before it came to my hand. A lot of good came of it. Sometimes we would sit patiently and get absolutely no response. Other times the activity was off the charts. One thing we always did as soon as there was activity was to ask with whom we were speaking. We would not proceed until a name was given. Algernon was a common visitor. One visitor who stood out was Patrick. We were hanging out in a field by the river and set up. Almost immediately there was activity. We asked for and got his name. Often we would question the old, young spirit, ghost at peace or torment. Well, Patrick told us he was young with a green wool hawk. We chatted with him for a while. He was an incredibly bad speller and humorous. When we went to leave, and was thanking him, the planchette flew around the board telling a horrible story. The story Patrick told will forever stay with me. He had gotten a ride out the back road from a party at the river. The people he was riding with started to argue. They pulled over and 2 of the guys started first fighting. Patrick tried to break it up. In the drunken haze, one of the guys got pissed because he was grabbed. The tides turned and both the fighters started beating Patrick. He was left at the wide spot unconscious and died. Years later, when the internet was a more common thing, my brother researched this incident in his quest to prove science over spirituality. It checked out to the letter. I would like to say we came forward with information, but we didn't. I learned a long time ago that at best we'd be called liars or crazy. Some years ago, me and my friends were staying in my parents' house when they were on vacation. We were bored and decided to find something fun to do on the internet. The first thing that popped up was this Ouija board with instructions on how to use it. We figured out that it was a good idea and printed it out. I read the instructions carefully, and we sat down on the dining table with the board in the middle. None of us really believed in paranormal stuff, so this was more for fun than it was to really connect with someone on the other side. We did all the preparations needed to proceed and started the game. After saying all the things the internet told me to say, we started asking more direct questions and so on. Nothing happened, and the glass we all had our finger on stayed perfectly still during the questions. The last question I asked was, "Is there anyone here?" But nothing happened. Disappointed as we were, we decided to do something else. So I started to put the items we had used back in place. The Ouija board I decided to burn, because I didn't want it to lay around. Now comes the first really creepy incident. I went to the fireplace to burn the printed out board. I held the board in one of the corners and lit it on fire from underneath. I held the board until it was covered in flames, so the whole board should burn up. I literally watched the whole board burn to ashes. I then went downstairs to watch what had happened to the dog. The dog was barking the whole day, but stopped the same moment we started playing. I thought this was weird, so I went downstairs. Downstairs in the house, there are 2 doors that go outside. When I was at the bottom of the stairs, I noticed the first door was wide open. I got scared and closed it before I went into the room where my dog was. Inside the room is the other door that goes out of the house, and guess what? This one was wide open as well. I ran upstairs again to tell my friends. When I ran past the fireplace, I noticed a little piece of paper laying in the ashes. When I turned it around, it said, "Yes," with a creepy-looking face half burned away. I made sure that the whole board was on fire before I let go of it. Then I remembered the last question I asked during the game. Is there anyone here? I was terrified, and we decided to leave the house. I went downstairs to get the dog and locked the doors, then came upstairs again to leave the house. Then again, something strange happened. We were all putting our clothes on upstairs. I mean, all of us were upstairs, even the dog. Suddenly, there were 3 loud banging sounds coming from downstairs, and we then got so scared that we ran away from the house. Please don't ever screw around with a Ouija board again. When I first went away to college, we used to mess with one so often, we'd start asking who was in the chat room when we took it out. We made a ton of creepy connections, the worst being when the marker went scooching around, and when we asked how many spirits were in the room, it went to 0, then spelled out DEM. That's as far as we let it get before we broke connection and closed the portal. When I moved home, I brought 2 spirits back with me. Nothing evil, but they were both very prominent. I had an old man that wore a hat, jacket, and smoked a pipe that followed me everywhere I went. I saw and smelled him frequently, and the other was a woman around my mom's age that ended up attaching to her, but mainly stayed in her bedroom. We ended up having the house cleansed after the cold in my room, and my mom's room got so ridiculous we had to have space heaters in there in July. Also, because the man was messing with my sleep by sitting down on the foot of my bed, so the covers would get tucked down, and there'd be an imprint, but no person, or yelling "wake up" in my ear. They're gone now, but long story short, I was lucky to not have had something much more malevolent attached to me. And if you do end up messing around with a Ouija board again, the way we always did it was ask who the spirit was significant to, and if it was a specific person, that person's hands, and anyone that knows any intimate details about that person's life cannot be anywhere near the marker. I will start out by letting you know I am a skeptic. Although I am part of a paranormal research group, I don't believe in any of it, and my role is to debunk whatever I can. So, now that you know I don't believe in paranormal occurrences and have a disdain for things that sound made up, here's my one and only Ouija board experience. About 25 years ago, I was in high school and had a couple of friends over. One was going to stay the night. One of them brought an Ouija board, so we decided to break it out and see what it was all about. We ran a battery of questions across it, had what appeared to be 2 different entities conversing with us, and were having a blast. One entity eventually faded away, and the other wasn't answering with the same enthusiasm as it once was. It was about this time that one of my friends had to go home, so he left. Eventually it moved to the goodbye area and everything stopped. We picked it back up 30 minutes or so later, and it answered a few questions again, without much enthusiasm. After a short while, it ended with goodbye again. As we got bored, we picked it up yet again, and the same process happened over and over. I don't recall how many times the entity indicated goodbye, followed by us pestering it a few minutes later. We were sprawled out on the floor waiting for it to answer a question we had just asked, when all of a sudden the phone rings. Now, these aren't the phones that are everywhere now. This was this thing could kill you if it fell on your head rotary desk phone that had a ringer that could wake the dead. Needless to say, we both jumped. I heard my dad in the living room answer the phone and say, "Hello," pause a couple of seconds, and then hang up. When I went to casually ask who it was, he said, "I don't know." In a scratchy voice they said, "Don't mess with me," and hung up. I casually, but swiftly, made it back to my room where we boxed up the board, threw it and the phone in the closet, and found all the Bibles we could find and stacked on top of them. One thing to note about the phone: my mom was a really light sleeper and Dad was on call 24/7. A phone ringing in the other room would wake him up. So he physically took the bells and ringer action out of the phone so Mom could have it by her bedside and not be woken up in the middle of the night. Even by just removing the bell, the movement of the action that would have rang the bell would wake Mom up. So the phone made absolutely zero noise when a call came in. That phone is the phone that was handed down to me and in my room. So, a few months ago, my younger cousin and I decided to dig out his mom's old Ouija board, an old one made of dark wood. The planchette was made of the same or a similar wood, and the eye was made of thick glass. We live together, as we go to the same college, so we usually do this kind of stuff. We turned off all the electronics in the house, including our cell phones, put the board in the center of his coffee table, lit a candle at each corner of said table, and started using it. We both come from a spiritual family, and had always been warned not to use Ouija boards because they always invite freaky things. While we were using it, we got boring, mundane answers for usual questions, such as when we would die. We both got 50 to 60 years, who the spirit was, which is something you aren't supposed to do. But we didn't know this at the time, and finally we put it away. Except we forgot to dismiss the spirit. After this, weird things started happening. We started hearing random tapping from random places in his house, scratching on the walls and ceiling in the kitchen, and the shower curtain being opened and closed randomly. From there, my record player would start playing randomly, but it would play the records backwards. We were often woken up by whatever record I had left out, which was usually Led Zeppelin playing backwards. It was unsettling, but it wasn't terrifying or anything, just weird. One weekend, we were sitting around playing Xbox when my cousin went upstairs to use the bathroom. While I was waiting for him, I heard a loud, inhuman guttural growl from the bathroom. My cousin screamed and ran back downstairs, his pants still around his ankles. I thought he had made the sound or played some weird soundboard through the speakers we had in the bathroom. Turns out, while he was on the toilet, the shower curtains had been torn off of the rings. When I say torn, I mean the curtain was ripped clean through. After the curtain had been torn down, something growled from in the tub. From there, we decided enough was enough. We took the Ouija board into the woods behind the house, doused it in lighter fluid, burned it, buried what wouldn't burn, and smashed the eye of the planchette. For a while, things calmed down and the strange stopped happening. Fast forward to yesterday. We decided to make a McDonald's run because we were both too lazy to cook. And when we walked outside and locked the door, we saw what was left of the board had been dug up, and that the eyeless planchette was in the center, the glass sprinkled around the board. My cousin and I are the only people who knew about the board, and we are the only ones who knew where it was buried. We buried the board again, this time deeper, and at a spot deeper in the woods. We both have no idea what to do. About 6 years ago, when I was about 18 years old, I was at a party with a few friends when we pulled out a Ouija board. At the time I was a little drunk and thought nothing of it. After a while, only myself and one girl, there were the only ones who still wanted to do it. We spoke to a spirit who revealed that its name was Bridget, who died in a car accident back in 1985 in the next town over from where we were. We asked what kind of car, what street, what date, who else was in the car, etc. I was getting a little freaked out at this point. We then said goodbye and blew out the candle. Just for the hell of it, I did a little digging the next couple of days through town records to see if the story was true. It all matched. Everything, the date, car model, location of accident, who else was in the car, everything that she told us was real. When I saw the girl a couple days later who asked those questions with me, I told her. Pulled the pictures up on my phone. Told her every detail matched precisely what the spirit told us. She turned a ghostly pale white and actually began to cry. It may not seem like much to most, but this was my first experience with the paranormal in my life at that point, and it really stuck with me. Ever since that day, things go missing. I feel taps occasionally, and could have swore once that I heard a car when there wasn't one there. I consulted someone I know who regularly practices Santeria. She told me that it is in fact still following me. It's unsettling to say the least to know. Sometimes I think I hear or see things, but just keep trying to convince myself it's nothing. So, I'll be as brief as I can. I believe in the paranormal, but Ouija boards have always been something I've been on the fence about. Last night me and 2 friends were using his Ouija board when we contacted a particularly messed up spirit. 2 of us were high, and we were all drunk, and yes, I realize this is where the first problem lies. Long story short, he told us he was a demon. He gave us a name we didn't remember or couldn't quite spell. He said he wanted something from us, but wouldn't say what. He said he intended to hurt all of us. We asked him why he hated us. He said, lust. We asked what we lusted for. He said, me. He did a figure 8. I later read this is not something you want a spirit to do. Landed on the 6, and started saying other random things, but really didn't want us to leave. We finally left, and in our stupidity, contacted it a couple more times. Each time he said goodbye before we were done talking to it. So here's where it gets really weird. First off, within about 5 minutes, all of our cell phones act up without us touching them. One of my friends gets a ring informing him he has a text. No text. One of them says he has a missed call, then looks to see that he has no missed call. I look at the couch and my phone has dialed the number 0 and is calling it. Shortly after, the stereo turns on without any of us even remotely near it. We decided to go to our friend's house. So here's what gets really weird. We get back at around 3 in the morning. My friend had lost his keys and lives in a decent part of town, so he didn't lock his door. We get back and it's locked. At this point his roommate was there and was able to let us in with her keys. We go inside and all of the furniture has been completely rearranged. In the kitchen, every single cabinet has been opened. Initially, it looked like a break-in, but we had multiple laptops, a PlayStation, and a television, none of which was taken. Nothing was removed, just moved. At this point, it hasn't done anything else. We all made it through the night without anything weird happening. A few years ago, my friends, a group of girls decided to try this out with a group of guys. We were in the 12th grade at the time. My group of girls had messed around with it before, to varying degrees of success. Well, this time, it was my hands on the planchette with my other girlfriend. This thing was moving crazy fast, faster than I had ever seen, and seemed to be getting quite agitated by the group of guys we were with who were joking around and not taking it seriously. It essentially told them to shut up and stop talking. I told the guys, seriously, please stop being rude. I'm kind of freaked out. Anyways, because I was getting nervous, one of the guys took over. He was a bit more serious about it. Almost immediately the thing spelled out, don't open the door. Well, we were all in the basement, and there was only one door, so we all kind of looked over at it nervously. Because I was getting anxious, I took the blanket and kind of hid my face. Immediately it spelled out, don't hide from me. Everyone was freaked out. The guy who had his hands on the planchette literally started to cry. He wanted to take his hands off. But we have this rule that you don't take your hands off until you get it to say goodbye. Everyone wanted to stop, but it took about 10 minutes of asking dumb questions until the thing finally slid to goodbye. Some of the guys speculated afterwards that it meant don't open the metaphorical door of the spiritual world. The reason being is we told them to never ask for a sign or else it kind of lets the spirit roam free outside of the board. Before that guy took over, they kept asking for a sign, only for me to cut them off mid-sentence and tell them to knock it off. So this made some sense. Looking back on it, I am very much quite atheist, so not entirely sure what to make of the situation. But I won't touch that thing ever again. That's how much of an impact it left. First and foremost, thank you for your continued support on the channel. It is so deeply appreciated, and I greatly enjoy connecting with every one of you. If you enjoyed these stories and want to hear more eerie tales, Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Which story did you enjoy? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. If there are particular stories you want to hear, please let me know. Until next time, my friends.